Hello everybody and welcome to a brand new Elder Scrolls Online character build video with me, Sherman. Now this is a special request character build. Somebody asked me if I could make something based on another game called Adventure Quest. Now I'm a big fan of Adventure Quest series. I've been with them for a long time. I started with the original Adventure Quest back when it first came out, and I played it off and on for several years, and then when the new Adventure Quest stuff came out, the different things that they did, I tried every version that they came out with all the way up till Adventure Quest 3D, and I still play some Adventure Quest from time to time. So there is a class within Adventure Quest called the Paladin Slayer, and it's basically an anti-paladin thing that hunts paladins and kills them, and it's really cool. And this person asked me if I could see what I could do to make that in this game. So I did my best, and I tried to create what I thought would fit best as it. So this is the Paladin Slayer from Adventure Quest, guys. But let's go ahead and get started by talking a little bit about it. As you can see, we are an Imperial Necromancer with this, and Necromancer just seemed to fit really well with the whole concept of it, because it does, in the other game it did disease damage and stuff like that to basically bring a lot of negative effects to the paladins, and these guys just hunt them. So as you can see, I chose Imperial because in the other game you mostly play humans, and Imperial seemed to be the best fit for this. For this to play as a damage dealer, which is its primary role, you got to put 64 points in the stamina. That's going to give you an really effective stamina pool, really decent health still, and a decent max magicka. So as you can see, we have 17k, almost 18k magicka, 27k health, 32k max stam, with a stam recovery of 951, 557 mag recovery, and a 397 health recovery. Now this thing can also play a tank and a healer. To play a tank, you would take the 64 points out of stam. You'd put enough into max health to give you about 30k, so only about 30 points would really need to go in here, if that, to get you there, and then the rest could go back into stamina. You will roughly have almost equal stamina and magicka, or equal stamina and health with this build as a tank. It's pretty scary. And then to play this as a healer, you take the 64 out of stamina, put it all into magicka. You will still have 27k health, but you will have about a 40k, or not a 40, a 30k max magicka. Now, if you are going to play this as a tank, I would suggest changing from the Thief Mundustone to the Lady Mundustone. If you're going to play this as a healer, switch to the Atronach Mundustone, so you get that higher mag recovery. As you can see, our weapon damage is coming in at 2788 with a 41% weapon critical. We do have a 1806 spell damage with a 28% spell critical, and a 19k, almost 20k spell resist with a 19k physical resist. Moving on, we are using the Thief Mundustone to get that higher crit chance, and we are using Tri-Stat Food. Tri-Stat Food gives you max health, stamina, and magicka, so it gives you all three resource types. Moving on to the equipment and inventory, starting with our first thing is our tripods. We use these when we're primarily tanking. We use spell power pots for when we're playing healer, and we use stamina power pots for when we're playing a damage dealer. Alright, now going over the sets, starting with the monster set. Our monster set of choice for this, and this one works really good for it, but there are other choices, you guys. This one just works really good for this, and that is Nearneths. So this adds max health of 1,206 on the one piece. The two piece, when you deal direct damage, you have a 10% chance to summon a Lich Crystal that explodes after 2 seconds, dealing X amount of damage to all enemies within 4 meters. This effect can occur once every 3 seconds. So you can pretty much get this up and proccing non-stop if you can keep the damage applied. And that's usually dot damage. Okay, going over to the next set, we are running Hunting's Rage. Hunting's Rage just works really good for maximizing damage potential with weapon damage and weapon crit. So the 2-piece adds weapon crit, 3-piece max stamina, 4-piece weapon crit, and the 5-piece adds weapon damage. Now, with this, it makes it fit really well into this setup, being a damage dealer, but also being kind of tanky as well, because you are fighting paladins. Paladins are very versatile builds, so you want to have something that can kill them very effectively. Now moving on to the jewelry. Our jewelry set, our jewelry and weapons, our other set, is going to be the Veiled Heritance. Now this set is a unique set for this type of a build, because the Veiled Heritance are an evil basic group for the Aldemary Dominion. They're against the idea of the Aldemary Dominion and everything with it. So the 2-piece adds weapon damage, the 3-piece adds more physical resistance, the 4-piece adds weapon critical, and then the 5-piece. When you deal damage, you have a 10% chance to increase your weapon damage by 400 for 5 seconds. So pretty much you're going to be getting 400 weapon damage along with the narrowness all the time. Okay, now we're going to go over traits and enchants on the gear, starting with the monster set. We are using an Invigorating Helm. This gives us a little bit of increased max health and stam and mag recovery by 11 for 1 piece, but we do have 2 pieces of Invigorating on our character to get 22 extra points. And depending on where your recovery rates are coming in, you do get a little bit more, and it makes it more effective for you. Moving on to the shoulder, going on with the helm. This is a medium helm, and it has got a tri-stat or a multi-fact enchantment in it. The tri-stat enchant gives you a little bit of health, magic, and stamina, and this allows you to be more versatile to play any role, tank, healer, damage dealer, but it also gives you good amount of resources for each pool when you're playing any role. Moving on to the shoulders. We are using a Divine's Heavy Shoulders with max stamina. Now, this is a 5 heavy armor setup. So it is built to be tanky. It is built to be like, I'm going to go in, I'm going to kick some butt, take names, and worry about everything else later. So it's a really nice setup. The reason for the Divines is to increase our Mundus Stone effect, and the max stamina is to increase our max stam pool. Alright, moving on to the body. We are using a reinforced chest on heavy armor. Reinforced on heavy armor chest pieces gives you the most amount of resistances of any armor piece you wear. So this is going to give you that higher resistance value. That's going to allow you to have higher resistances overall. So we use that reinforced. The multi-stat enchant, again, is to maximize all 3 resource pools, but also to make us more versatile at playing all 3 roles. Moving on to the gloves, we are using a heavy gloves of Hunting's Rage, max stamina with Divines. Again, this is to maximize our resource pool, and the Divines is to increase the Mundus Stone effect. Moving on to the belt, it is a light belt, max stamina Divines, and I've been asked several times, and it's getting a little bothersome repeating myself, but I'll go ahead and do it one last time. The reason for the light belt and medium shoulders. So I have tested a bunch of different variations in getting max resistances with a build. The best way to do this, to get the most resistance out of your character, is to use a light belt and medium head on 5 pieces of heavy armor. The reason why, it gives you the best resistance value possible. Now, a lot of people think using a heavy helm with medium gloves is better. It is by a small amount, but it's such a small amount that it's not worth it. Because you do want that higher resistance value in your gloves. But your helm, when you're talking about the difference between a heavy helm and a medium helm, it's roughly about 400 resistances. When it comes to gloves, it's like 400 resistances. So you're pretty much getting about an equal amount here in resistance either way you go. But you end up with a little bit more this way. Now moving on to the boots, we are using Divine's Max Stamina Heavy Boots. And again, Max Stamina is to maximize their stamina pool. The Divines is to increase our Mundus Stone effect. For every piece of Divines, you get 7.5% increased Mundus Stone effect. So with having 4 of them, you get just over 24% increase to your Mundus Stone. Now going over the legs, we are using Invigorating again. This is going to increase your max health, magic, and stamina recovery by 11, with a total of 22 because you're wearing 2 pieces of Invigorating. Now I get asked why I've been doing this with my heavy armor builds and some of my other builds. It depends on how much recovery I'm trying to get out of the build, but some of them I'm trying to get a little bit more than average, and this just gives you that little oomph that you need. Alright, going over the jewelry, we are wearing 2 rings of Trirune from the Veiled Heritance. Both of these rings that are Trirune, they give you almost the equal amount of this. They're just 1 point off in the Magicka, Stamina, and Health. So this actually gives you 1 point more, which isn't much. But the Tri-Stat on these, or the Trirune on these, allows you to hybridize better into all 3 roles, but it also allows you to get good resource pools with all 3 attributes. So it's a really nice benefit. We are using 2 weapon damage enchants here to maximize our weapon damage potential. And then on the necklace, we are using an infused stamina recovery. Now, this one you could go bloodthirsty here, but your stamina recovery is going to drop quite a bit. So I like to keep it a little bit higher. That's why I use infused. Moving on to the weapons, we are using dual 2-handed weapons. So we are using a 2-handed sword on the front bar, 2-handed sword on the back bar. On the front bar, it will be Nirnhoned is going to be the best option. You can go Sharpen if you don't have Nirnhoned, and a disease damage enchant. You don't have to use disease, you can use poison, but I like disease because I like that minor defile applied to my enemies, and the disease damage over time is really nice when it procs. Nirnhoned just increases your damage with the weapon by 15%. So if you see the damage here says 1806, it's normally 1571. But because we Nirnhoned it, it actually goes up in damage. And that 1806 applies to both weapon and spell damage. So moving on to the back bar, we are using an infused greatsword, increased weapon damage enchant. So the weapon damage enchant doesn't just apply to weapon damage, it also applies to spell damage. So either bar you're on, you're going to get that weapon and spell damage enchant effect, and it's going to be greater overall. Alright, infused increases the weapon enchant effect by 30% and reduces the enchantment cooldown by 50%. So, really beneficial to you. Now we're going to go ahead and talk a little bit about skills, starting with the main skills for our class in the Gravelord line. So Gravelord line, I take all the stamina morphs. The reason for that, I can get greater advantage out of the stamina morphs than I can Magicka. The only one that isn't Magicka morphed is Unnerving, or Stamina morphed is Unnerving Boneyard, and that's because this cannot be made into a Magicka or a Stamina morph. It still does a decent amount of frost damage over 10 seconds, and it also applies Major Breach and Major Fracture, giving you that higher penetration value for both spell damage and weapon damage. Moving on to Bone Tyrant, I do unlock the Ruinous Scythe as an ability that I can use, and then all the active abilities here are to represent me as a tank. Living Death, I do unlock all the active abilities, ultimate and passives, and I do unlock all the passives for L skill lines, so I can take advantage of each skill line's passives within my character's playstyle. So this way I can take advantage of each one's active effects, depending on which role I'm playing, whether I'm playing a tank, a healer, or damage dealer. The Living Death skill line is mostly heals, so I do take those, and I take the ones that best reflect my ability to play this character, not only as a healer, but also as other things, like having some skills for group support, heals, for just group support, things like that. Moving on to weapon skills, we primarily use it two-handed with this build, so we do take the ultimate active abilities and passives, and we do take advantage of every skill we can in that skill line for different roles, whether we're playing a tank or a healer or damage dealer. Now, if you want to be a more effective tank with this, it is good to unlock the sword and shield skill line, so you can get the active abilities, passives, ultimates, all that stuff that reflect the sword and shield, and it does allow you to tank a little bit better, and you can still use it two-handed on the back bar. The other thing that you can use is a destruction staff or restoration staff on the back bar. Your choice, depending on what role you're playing. When it comes to armor passives, we do use the light armor passives, so we take the top 3 of the light armor passives. Because we are wearing that one piece of light armor, we want to take advantage of these. Same thing goes with medium armor, the 2 passives there and the bottom one, we want to take advantage of those. Same thing comes with heavy armor. Since we are wearing 5-piece heavy armor, you want to take advantage of every passive here. And I do unlock the active ability there. World skills, you can be a vampire with this or a werewolf, your choice. Both work very well. I did test them, so they do work very well with this, but I do prefer using the nothing at all, because it just works, in my opinion, a little better. Ultimate or soul magic line, the ultimate active ability and the first passive are optional. I take them because I do use them in different situations. In this case, I do use the soul assault ability, and I'll get to that in a second. Also, soul summons and soul lock are very good passives to get. Moving on to the guild skills. Now, I'm just going to go through these really quick so you guys can see this. Finder's Guild, Mage's Guild, and Psijic Order. I take the ultimate active abilities and passives for each line. For some reason, I keep forgetting these ones. Probably because the first thing's unlocked and you never scroll down that far, really, so... But again, I do take all the active passives and abilities because you never know what you will need for different roles or different situations or different aspects of the game, whether it's PvP, PvE, overland, delves, public dungeons, or trials. A lot of these skills can work in different situations and make your group more effective in certain aspects of the game, especially if you're in a learning process. Or is what people call a progression process. Next thing is Undaunted. I do unlock the active abilities and passives here. The reason for the active abilities is these are all synergies, and you can use them to that advantage in your group to offer more synergies in group dynamics when you're playing in group play. The passives themselves are really good because anytime you activate a synergy, your Undaunted command will give you 4% of your resources back. And then your Undaunted Metal will increase your max health, stamina, and magicka by 2% per type of armor you're wearing. So if you're wearing a heavy, a medium, and light piece, all 3 types, you will get 6% of your increase to your resources. To unlock the Undaunted line, you have to play through dungeons, either the stories in the dungeons, the Undaunted pledges, daily pledges, which means the delve pledge and the dungeon pledges, or you play the random daily dungeons. Moving on to Alliance War. Assault skills. I take the ultimate and these 2 active abilities because they best reflect my ability to play PvE. And I don't mean I need them. They work in PvE really well, so I take advantage of that, and I learn them for that purpose. Warhorn I use when I'm tanking, Echoing Vigor when I'm playing some support, or even as a healer, and Razor Caltrops for damage. Now, the Alliance War skills you can only unlock by playing PvP, so that's Battlegrounds and Cyrodiil PvP content, and you have to do specific content within Cyrodiil to get AP, which means killing players, taking keeps, taking resources, pretty much capturing areas of the game for Cyrodiil will garner you points. Support, I also do the same thing. I take the ultimate, 2 active abilities, but I also take the 1 passive magical aid, and that's because anytime I have a support ability slotted, I get 10% magic recovery, and it really helps out, especially when playing a healer. On to racials. We are an Imperial with this, so we get the Diplomat line, which increases our gold gain by 1%. We also get increased experience in one-handed sword and shield. We get Toughness, which increases our max health, or Tough, which increases our max health by 2,000. We get Imperial Metal, which increases our max stamina by 2,000, and then we get Red Diamond. This one reduces the cost of all of our abilities by 3%. So this applies to both Magicka and Stamina abilities and ultimates. So we get that 3% reduced cost and all that. But the 3% also stacks with the 2% you get from your light armor and your medium armor passive. So you actually get 5% reduced cost in stamina and magic abilities. And then whenever you deal damage, you heal yourself for X amount and restore magic and stamina every 5 seconds when you're dealing damage. So as long as you're doing damage using any kind of a damage ability, every 5 seconds you will get resources back. Moving on to crafting passives, Alchemy has a really good one called Medicinal Use. Now this one, when using potions, resulting effects last 30% longer, and Provisioning has 2, which are called Gourmand and Connoisseur. Both of these add 20-minute durations to your food and drinks. Now if you want to use Dubious Cameron Throne with this, you can. It'll give you a little less health and max health, but it'll give you higher stam recovery. You can also use Artaeum Takeaway Broth, or if you're playing a healer, you can use the Clockwork Citrus Fillet or the Witch Mother's Potent Brew. Alright, so now to discuss the skills we have on our bars. Starting with the front bar, we have our first ability, which is called Wrecking Blow. Now this deals X amount of damage in a single hit upward swing, and in your next light attack you'll get Empower for 5, or the next thing you get is Empower for 5 seconds, increasing the damage of your next light attack by 40%. The next ability we have is called Venom Skull, and basically with this, you lob an explosive skull at an enemy, dealing X amount of poison damage. Every third cast of this ability deals 20% more damage, and then while slotted, casting any Necromancer ability while you are in combat towards the third will affect towards the third cast. The next ability we have on the board is called Unnerving Boneyard. This does frost damage over 10 seconds in a 6-meter radius, and it applies Major Breach and Major Fracture to anything within that circle area. Even if they walk into it, they will get Major Breach and Major Fracture. It does consume a corpse on cast to add 20% more damage, but we're not using corpses to add damage to this. An ally standing in the graveyard can activate the Grave Robber Synergy, dealing X amount of frost damage to enemies in the area and healing you for the damage done. Now, the next ability we have is called Blighted Blast Bones. This one, you summon a skeleton after 2.5 seconds. It'll take off running, and it will explode, dealing damage to that enemy when it gets close to them. But it applies it to all enemies in the area, and applies Major Defile as well for 4 seconds, reducing their healing received and health recovery by 30%. And this does create a corpse on death. Right. The next ability we have is called Executioner Strike, and yes, or Executioner, and yes, this is an execute. So basically, you spin and strike the enemy down, dealing X amount of physical damage, and deals up to 350% more damage to enemies with less than 50% health. So when you get the enemies below 50% health, put this into your rotation. When you get it to 25% health, this becomes your spammable. Your next ability or ultimate is going to be Flawless Dawnbreaker. This one, basically, when you activate it, it'll deal X amount of damage in a 10-meter cone in front of you. Sorry guys, allergies. And it'll deal X amount of damage over 6 seconds. While slotted, your weapon damage is increased by 5%. Now that 5% only applies to the front bar, guys. Moving on to the back bar. we have another two-handed, and of course we have more skills here. Starting with the first one, we are using Rearming Trap. Basically, you throw this out, it will arm itself. It's a small trap. It'll arm itself, and it takes 1.5 seconds to do that. When it's triggered, it deals X amount of damage, and then at X amount of damage over 6 seconds, it will also immobilize the enemy if they can be immobilized for 6 seconds, and it grants you minor force, increasing your critical damage by 10%. After being triggered, the trap resets and can be triggered one more time. So you actually get 12 seconds of this damage over time, and the immobilization, and the minor force. The next ability we have is called Carve. Now this is how we keep our back bar enchantment applied. Basically, you swing your weapon in a cone shape that reaches 7 meters around you, and when it does this, it hits multiple targets, all for the same amount of damage up front, and applies a bleed to them, dealing X amount of damage over 10 seconds. That 10-second timer of that damage over time is what keeps our proccing, our enchantment proccing for our weapon and spell damage enchant. Moving on to the next ability, we do have Razor Caltrops. This is a great ability. Basically, you throw out a handful of Caltrops into the air, they explode, dealing X amount of damage to all enemies within a 8-meter radius, and then they come crashing down to the ground, and any enemy in the area takes X amount of damage every second for 12 seconds, and it also reduces their movement speed by 30%. Our next ability on the bar is called Detonating Siphon. Now this one, you violently drain the last spark of life from a corpse. Most of the time you are going to be activating it off your Blighted Blast Bones, and it will deal X amount of disease damage over 12 seconds to all enemies around the corpse and between you and the corpse. So basically you create this tether line, and wherever that tether line is attached, anything in between there takes damage. If the siphon lasts its full duration and causes the corpse to explode, dealing an additional X amount of disease damage to all enemies around the corpse, and then while slotted, your damage done is increased by 3%. This is great on the back bar, because on the back bar you don't have a lot of weapon damage, so that 3% extra damage to all these abilities really helps out. The next ability we have is a floater ability, but this is what I prefer to use here, and it is called Rally. When you activate Rally, you gain Major Brutality for 33 seconds. This increases your weapon damage by 20%. But when you activate it, you start a heal on yourself that heals you every 2 seconds for X amount of health, and then while active. And an additional X amount of health when Rally expires. The final heal is increased by up to 564% in proportion to the length of time Rally has been active. So I'm just going to show you this. I'm going to activate Rally right now. So Rally will start ticking. As you can see, it does X amount of healing every 2 seconds. Now, the longer you let it last before you activate it again will depend on how much healing the final heal does. Now, I activate this every second rotation because it lasts so long. So every second rotation I reapply this, and when I do, I will roughly be about right here when I cast it again. So when I cast it again, I get a huge heal from it. But that's the reason why I use Rally, is because it's my primary heal for this build. Now, moving on to the final ultimate ability, we do use Soul Assault. Now this one, basically you shoot a beam at the enemy that can reach 28 meters. It does cost 97 ultimate. It's pretty cheap, but it does a lot of damage over 3.5 seconds, and enemies afflicted by this ability are revealed for 2 seconds and may not enter stealth or invisibility for that 2 seconds. So it's really nice in PvP, but I also like to use it in PvE. So, alright, now that I've shown you the skills, I'm going to go over the champion points. And I did have to do some finagling with it earlier to get the champion points in the right area, and it was mainly for the resistance value. So, starting with the red tree, we have 56 in Ironclad. This reduces your damage taken from direct damage attacks by 20%. We have 38 in the Spell Shield. This increases your spell resistance by 3250. Now, the reason for the 38 here is because we are wearing the Veiled Inheritance, which gives us increased physical resistance by 2970 something. So, to offset that, we put all the points into here to give us that more balanced effect to our resistances. Alright, moving on, we have 31 into Thick Skin. This reduces your damage taken from damage over time effects by 13%. We have 43 into Hardy, reducing your damage taken from physical, poison, disease damage by 10%, and 43 into Elemental Defender, reducing your Flame, Frost, Shock, and Magic damage by 10%. Moving on to the final red tree, we have 40 into Bastion. This increases the effectiveness of damage shields, the effectiveness of your damage shields by 16%. This includes damage shields applied to you and your own ones you cast. We also have 19 into Quick Recovery, increasing our healing received by 5%. Now, before I continue on, a lot of people have been noticing that I've been using the same kind of CP formula for a lot of builds. It's called a universal formula. It allows me to make it to where the characters can play all three roles without having to switch anything. Most of the time. Moving on to the green tree, we have 40 into Warlord, reducing our break free cost by 16%, 16 into Sprinter, reducing the sprint cost by 10%, 16 into Bashing Focus, reducing bash cost by 10%, and then moving on to the middle green tree here, we have 75 into Mooncalf. This is going to increase our stam recovery by 14%, and I've mentioned this before, the only time I put into Tenacity anymore is for when I'm playing in heavy armor or using a Resto Staff. Otherwise, I don't waste my time putting points in here because it's just not worth the expenditure. This increases your Magicka and Stamina return of your fully charged heavy attacks by 10%. When you're wearing heavy armor, you get 25% more on that, and then also a base 30%. So you actually get a 65% return of resources with heavy armor. Now, with regular weapons, it would just be a 40% return, which is 10% more than what you would normally get. That 10% I can get better effect by putting it in my mag recovery, which is going to help me more effectively gain my magic resource back in light and medium armors, which aren't affected by tenacity as well. So, moving on to the final green tree, we have 40 into Tumbling, reducing our dodge roll cost by 16%, and 40 into Shadow Ward, reducing our block cost by 16%. Moving on to the blue tree, and like I said, I build this to work with certain things. So with this one, I build it to be a healer, a tank, and a damage dealer. Its primary damage dealing type is stamina, so I don't put much into the Elfborn and an Elemental Expert unless I'm going to play healer, and then I hybridize the build, so I can still take advantage of physical damage and spell damage together. But to play it as a healer, we have 43 in a Bless. This increases our healing done by 10%. Moving on to the middle tree here, we have 35 in the Physical Weapon Expert. This increases the damage done with light and heavy attacks for two-handed, one-handed and shield, dual wield, and bow weapons, as well as werewolf form by 20%. And then we have 40 in the Master at Arms, which increases our damage done with direct damage attacks by 16%. This will allow you to unlock Retaliation, Reposit, and Butcher. So Butcher increases your damage with light and heavy attacks by 5% when the enemy's below 25% health. Reposit allows whenever you block an attack, you have a 15% chance to deal X amount of damage back to the enemy. That effect can occur once every 5 seconds. And then the Retaliation, when you block a heavy attack, your next light attack used within 7 seconds deals 30% more damage. Moving on over here to the final blue tree, we have 56 in the Mighty. This increases your physical, poison, disease damage done by 12%. We have 56 in the Precise Strikes, increasing your critical damage and critical healing with stamina abilities by 20%. And then we have 40 in the Thaumaturge. This increases your damage done with damage over time effects by 16%. Alright. And yes, you do unlock Opportunist, Perfect Strike, Exploiter, and Last Stand, which are all good passive constellations. Alright, now that I've shown you guys that, I'm going to do 2 quick parses. One on this little skeleton here, the Precursor. This is to represent your damage done in dungeons. And basically, how much damage you do in a dungeon regularly when you're playing a damage dealer is usually between 300,000 to 600,000, depending on the amount of health the boss has. So this just gives you a better representation of that. Now, I also will parse on this big guy over here. This is going to show our representation of our damage done in an organized group and doing a trial. So, first thing we do is pop our potion, then we run through our rally, all of our buffs and debuffs. Oops, and I didn't even get to use my execute. With that, we did roughly 26k DPS. That's 26,000 damage, which isn't bad for a heavy armor build, okay? We did get 4,395 weapon damage with 50% weapon critical, 80% critical damage, and 6,780 physical penetration. Moving on down here, you can see that our abilities did a decent amount of damage depending on which ones we were using and how we used them. Now, remember, in this next attempt over here, my damage will be increased because this thing will give me basically 100% spell and physical penetration. So, again, the whole process all over again. We are going to start on the back bar. And last time I didn't use any ultimates or my other thing. Now this time I'm going to actually use these abilities, and I didn't get that one off in time, but we're going to go ahead and use Soul Assault. And you can see Soul Assault was hitting for about 90k, or 90k, about 19k per tick. And here we're doing about 31. I can usually keep a good 35k rotation on that, but I was making a few mistakes because I was trying to keep an eye on my rotation with my abilities there. But yeah, I can usually pull about 35k. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this into a dungeon and show you guys the effectiveness of this build in a dungeon scenario. And the one we're going to be using is called Depths of Malatar. This was added with the Wrathstone DLC, which came out right before Elsewhere, and is part of the year-long Season of the Dragons storyline. And we do have a new dungeon DLC getting added to the game here soon called Scalebreaker. It will be on PTS on Monday. And I do have an announcement in a video to talk about that coming Sunday, explaining a little bit about what's going to happen next week. Alright, so let's go ahead and go down here and show this thing in action. I'm probably going to need a damage shield, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to move this over, and I'm going to grab the Fighters Guild ability, or not Fighters Guild, Undaunted Spike Bone Shield. Now I'm also going to go on the back bar, and on the back bar I'm going to go ahead and do this. I'm going to remove Rally. And I'm actually going to switch my Living Death to Mortal Coil instead of the one that does damage. This will heal me. It'll also give me stamina back. And then I'm also going to grab Bone Tyrant's Beckoning Armor. So I have a resistance buff. This will give me greater survivability because I'll be super tanky. As you guys can see, I actually go to 24/24 here on resistances. That gives me a little bit better survivability. Sometimes I can't even tell how fast I kill things with this build because it's so ridiculously overpowered, no offense. Goodbye. Boom. Dead. So sad how fast things die sometimes. Alright. Now this one might kill me because my heal, I have to do that whole thing with the siphoning and all that. But we'll see. Oh, I was wondering why I was taking so much damage. I'm like, why am I getting hurt so bad? Now, I can't do any more damage to him, otherwise I will kill him, and if I do kill him, he will teleport away, or I won't kill him, but I'll scare him away, and he'll go into hiding, and it's harder for him to kill me, so I let him go ahead and kill me at about 16k health. When I get him down to 1,600,000 health. So as you guys can see, this thing is actually pretty powerful for a damage dealer. And the big reason why it's so powerful is we do get a lot of weapon damage, but we also get a decent amount of weapon crit. Now, I am going to go back real quick. I want to show this. This is the damage we did on the big guy. And here you can see that we had 5,000 weapon damage with a 57% weapon critical, 80% critical damage. And it was reading the wrong spell penetration or physical pen because it doesn't calculate or it doesn't show that you're getting 100% penetration because of the debuffs from the tank. So you are getting, basically you're getting every debuff in the game on the enemy. And then the same thing works over here. You can see we go to 2676 or 2767 spell damage with the 34% spell critical. This makes it really effective for healing. That amount spell damage is good for healing. Really good magic healing. So, but yeah, I do like this build. It's a lot of fun. And to the person who gave me the idea for this, I might try a few more from the Adventure Quest series, but not at this moment. I'm gonna because of what's going on next week. But I do plan on bringing some of the other builds to this if I can. Okay, so just letting you know now. And that is it for this build, the Paladin Slayer player request build. Hope you guys liked it. If you did, you guys know what's coming next. Go ahead and hit that like button. If you guys want to see more videos by me, you can subscribe. Other than that, thank you all for watching. Until next time, have a wonderful day. And this guy might see you in game. Bye.